I've decided to, I need to invest in some stocks, I'm pretty sure. So I need to diversify though, so I'm going with chicken and beef and vegetable. One day I hope to be a billionaire. Chicken stock. Okay, never mind. Bullion.
She said, was that the dark?
You know it's bad when you don't even know it's
You always have
so like, chicken stock is also called bullion.
Which is
Seriously, even the freshmen at least got it. They didn't like it, but they at least got it. Hey, we're being recorded. I'm not sure that you
That wasn't me, by the way. Elijah Goose is not a part of that.
It's being sent.
That was all Jake and Ben.
Thank you,
Let me
John.
give you a descriptive detail. So they were.
I have asked you to take your books out. I've asked you to open them up to the student lecture or teacher lecture.
Jake, open your book.
It's almost like I'm not.
Page 40?
yeah.
Wait.
43.
No, the student lecture?
The teacher lecture.
Yeah.
For chapter 5.
Yeah. That's 40.
My book's different than your book. You ready? Okay, here's the thing. The last class found this out the hard way, so I'm going to give you a little good advice. If all you're going to do is look up at the screen and write down the words on the screen and not pay attention or write down anything else, you're going to bomb the quiz, even with open book and open friend.
Today?
So make sure that it's the same quiz you always take. It's quiz 5 that I always do, open book, and not always, but I almost always do open book and open friend, but you have to pay attention. You have to do more than just write down the words, okay? You got that, Elijah?
Yeah.
Why's your head down?
What? Oh, I don't know.
So yesterday we talked about John 1:14 through 18, the incarnation of Christ, and here's the passage we're studying. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. John bore witness about him and cried out, "This was he of whom I said, he who comes after me ranks before me, because he was before me. For from his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, the only God, meaning Jesus, who is at the Father's side. Jesus has made God known." So we talked about a number of things. We talked about the meaning of the incarnation, that Jesus came in fleshly form. He was a real, live, human being. The Word became flesh and pitched his tent right among ours. And then we talked about he was not a theophany. He was not a visible appearance of God, but not a physical appearance. He was flesh and blood. He was a physical appearance. He was God in the flesh, not a theophany. We talked about some of the Old Testament theophanies. He dwelt among us, and we compared Jesus to the tabernacle. He pitched his tent. He tabernacled among us, pitched his tent right next to ours. And I told you that most of these aren't important, that it's temporary, outwardly unattractive, just normal. God's dwelling place. The one thing that I told you was important of all these things, the most important of all these things, was that the tabernacle was where God met man. And Jesus is that same thing. Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." And he is the only way. And he is the place where we meet God. And then the last one was that he was the center of Israel's camp and should be the center of our lives. So then we talked about the purpose of the incarnation. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory. Glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. John bore witness about him and cried out, "This was he of whom I said, he who comes after me ranks before me, because he was before me. For from his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, the only God, who is at the Father's side. He has made him known." So he came to reveal the nature of God. He came to reveal the nature of God and who God is. And it says at the end there that no one has ever seen God, the only God who is at the Father's side. Jesus has made God known. It also says that we have seen his glory of the only Son, the Father, from the Father, full of grace and truth. So we see God's glory. God's glory was seen in Christ. We see God's grace and God's truth in him, and he has, and we see God's grace and truth. His grace and his truth, and we see that God is revealed to us through Christ. So he reveals the nature of God. He reveals the grace of God. And we talked about how the difference between mercy and grace. And he reveals the truth of God. And I believe we talked about that one, did we not? I think we talked about it in this one. So we talked about how part of the truth that he came to reveal was that was the truth about who we are, that we are sinful human beings and we cannot fix ourselves. But also that God hates sin, and we get that when someone else sins against us. We don't like it about our sin, and we think we kind of minimize our sin. Well, I haven't done anything that bad. But all sin separates us from God. All sin is made Jesus have to die on the cross. My sin, your sin, all of it, put Jesus on that cross. And so God hates all sin because sin is what has brought about the condition of our world and the yucky things that exist in our world. And we talked about how God loved us and wanted to be with us. But he is also just. He is also truthful, and so our sin had to be punished. If God punishes us, all of us, then his truth is satisfied, but his love is frustrated. He can't be with us. Yet if he overlooks our sin, he's not grandma and grandpa. If he overlooks our sin, his love is satisfied, but his truth, his justice, is not. It is compromised, which is why there is only one answer. There is only one way, and that is the cross of Christ, where he took on our punishment. I don't imagine any of you have stepped in to take on the punishment of a brother or sister of yours. No, ground me, not him. No, you don't do that. Give me that one where I can't drive for 6 months. I'll take that. Take my phone away, not his. No. But Jesus did that in the most horrible way imaginable. He did that. So Jesus' agony on the cross, his suffering on the cross, reveals not only the grace and truth of God, but it reveals several other things as well. That's a story I was supposed to read. Oh, by the way, this is Gordon's Calvary. This is in Jerusalem, and it's. Do you remember what Calvary means, or what Golgotha? What Golgotha means? The place of the skull. And if you look in the side of that, you kind of see something that looks like a skull, and that caused people to believe that that was the place where Jesus was crucified. More recent scholarship has shown that it isn't, that it's another place, and there's some other hypotheses about which hill is Golgotha. We know that it was outside the city gates during Jesus' time. It is no longer outside the city gates. And I think they found the city gates and found that this was not outside the city gates. I don't know that for sure. But I do know that the modern scholars don't believe that that's Golgotha. But the thing is, there is a real Golgotha. Whether we know where it is or not, it really is there. And he really did die, and he really did suffer a horrific death out of love for us. There are people I would die for, but there's a whole lot of people I wouldn't die for. And Jesus died for all. Jesus died for people who hate him. And so this truth of the death of Christ teaches us, and the purpose we already talked about, to reveal the nature of God, the grace of God, the truth of God. But it reveals, the truth that it reveals to us is, first of all, the awful consequences of sin. Look at what sin has wrought in our world. Everything yucky in our world, everything painful in our world is because of sin. And it was not meant to be. But the awful consequences of our sin. You could think of anything that's happened in your life that has been hurtful or difficult or painful or agonizing even. And sin is the root cause. My father died of Alzheimer's. It ought not be. It's not how God intended it. My mother died of cancer. That's not how God intended it. Sin has wrought horrible things in our world. And our sin is just as bad. We tend to wink at our sin. Our sin is just as bad. All sin separates us from God. So the second truth it reveals because of that is God's hatred of sin. He does not hate us. He loves us. But he does hate sin because it hurts his people. Remember I told you about, I did tell you about Jesus in front of Lazarus' tomb and why he wept. He wept. I didn't talk about that yesterday. I really didn't. Well, we'll talk about it again when we get to John 11. But as you know, because people say all the time, can I memorize the shortest verse in the Bible? No, you cannot. I mean, you can. It's Jesus wept. And he's at the tomb of Lazarus, and he knows he's going to raise Lazarus. And it tells us he was two things. It tells us he was angry. We'll talk more about that when we get there. And it tells us that he wept. Why? He knew that he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. Why would he cry? He looked around him and he saw the grieving and the sorrow of the people. And he wept because of what sin has wrought, because of what sin has brought into the world. And our sin is part of that. Our sin isn't any different than anyone else's. When we knowingly do something we know we're not supposed to do, we're sinning. And it has the same consequence. It all brings yucky stuff into the world. And so God hates all of it. He doesn't hate us, but he does hate sin, and he hates what sin has done to his world and to his people, how it has hurt us. And then it reveals the consequences that we must pay if we refuse Christ, if we refuse the substitute, if we refuse to accept God's free gift of salvation. Then we've chosen to pay for our own sin. And that's a debt we can't pay, at least not this side of the grave, but we'll pay it on the other side. So it's serious stuff that we're talking about. So I'm going to hand out the quiz now, and you'll take that together in your groups. There are a couple of answers that I think are going to be hard for you, so I'm going to leave the video on until I have answered those for you. So Angela can get the right answers when she gets to her quiz. What? No, I'm going to leave it on for just a couple more minutes because I'm going to give them the answers. Okay, I should have closed this. I should turn it to the quiz.
It's better.
Okay, number 4. Number 4 and 5, I think I didn't talk about in the lecture. So the glory of God is his A, graces and attributes. Number 4 is A. Number 5, the Greek word translated witness is connected to the English word see, martyr. The Greek word for witness is connected to the word martyr, see. The rest of this you can do open book, and in your groups, you can turn them in when you're done. You'll have plenty of time, and you can study when you're done.
Number 2 is D.